Without objection.
And Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent I be recognized as for whatever time I shall consume as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, there's a simple reason why we are all talking about the debt limit increase, and it's the fact that this president has spent more money than I ever believed would be possible. So far, he's spent over $10 trillion in 3 years. And next year, if he has his way, he'll spend another $3.5 trillion. I remember so well back during the Clinton administration, I think it was 1995, I was outraged. I came down to this podium and I said, can you believe a president has a budget of $1.5 trillion? And this president has spent $10 trillion in this short period. If he hadn't spent all of this money, then we wouldn't be here talking about a debt limit increase right now. I hate to sound so partisan about it, but it's truly a partisan issue. The Democrats have supported his spending and the Republicans have not. The Boehner plan that we're going to vote on, they're going to vote in the House today, and I think we might have an opportunity to vote on here later on tonight. Now, it may not be perfect. None of the stuff around here is perfect, but it's good. It is good, and it has dramatically improved over the last 12 hours. It allows the debt limit increase, but only after we significantly cut spending. Never before have we tied, in the history of this country, a debt limit increase to spending cuts. But it's something we have to do now, and that we are so far into this mess. The first step of this plan cuts spending by over $900 billion in exchange for $900 billion increase in debt limit. That will last the president until around February. And I think it's a fair deal. I'd like to cut the spending more, but we can only do so much when we only control the House. The second step of this plan is also good. It establishes a mechanism to quickly consider $1.8 trillion in additional spending cuts between now and the end of the year. It also requires Congress to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and send it to the states for ratification. Now, this is something that just happened in the last 12 hours. People are talking about, well, we really want to do something. A balanced budget amendment is the only way it's going to be good for now and for the future. And we've been talking about this for many, many years. I remember so well, way back in the 1970s, I was in the state Senate in Oklahoma when Carl Curtis, a very wonderful gentleman from Nebraska, he's a senator, had been a senator for quite some time. He was the perennial author of the balanced budget amendment, but he never could get it through. But he had an idea. He came to me in the state of Oklahoma and he said, you know, Inhofe, we have been trying to get this balanced budget amendment for a long time, and the excuse they use is you're never going to get the required number of states to ratify it. And he said, I've come up with an idea. We will get 3/4 of the states to pre-ratify a balanced budget amendment constitution, to the Constitution. Well, that was kind of an ingenious thing. And he said, why don't you be the first state? And so I did. And we passed by resolution in my state of Oklahoma in 1975, I believe it was, a ratification of a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution that didn't exist. That's kind of neat. And we actually got up to almost 3/4 of the states, and some of the other forces knocked it down. But that's how long we've been doing this. But in the intervening years, there hasn't been 1 year that we talked about a balanced budget amendment that hasn't come up for discussion. Well, this is probably the first time that it is a possibility, because we've never been in the spending situation that we're in right now. As I said, $10 trillion in just 3 years. So right now, we added that just in the last 12 hours, and if that legislation passes, the president will get an additional debt limit increase. So we're tying it to behavioral patterns in spending and austerity, and it's a smart way to do it. This proposal would keep the debt limit and the spending debate at the forefront of the national conversation. We must have this conversation. If we don't, we'll be worrying about things a lot worse than an increase in the debt limit. The president wants nothing to do with this. He just wants a blank check to increase the debt so he can continue to raise deficits. Why do I think this? Well, if we undid all of his policies today, the policies that so rapidly increase the spending and are killing our economy, then we wouldn't need a debt limit increase. The president's spending addiction is the only reason. Now, this is unilateral. This is the president of the United States. This was his budget. So it's not a group of people, it's him. And a lot of people are looking at Washington and say, don't any of them really care? Well, there's one guy that doesn't, and that's the President of the United States. His action are what we're talking about today. And we'll look at the failed policies. First, we have Obamacare. There it is, Obamacare. Now, we're talking about right now trying to get something like $800 billion in all these negotiations so that we can increase the debt limit in one fell swoop, $1.5 trillion. This plan cost the estimated over the current decade. Once it's fully implemented, the 10-year cost nearly doubles to $2.5 trillion. This law dramatically expands the government's influence and involvement in the healthcare sector, and together with Medicare and Medicaid, it will result in the financial ruin of this great country. So that's $1.5 trillion. Second, we have the failed stimulus plan. We all know that it didn't meet any of Obama's expectations. Of course, it clearly met all of mine. I didn't expect much. It didn't help the economy a bit. It only expanded the size of government. I can remember when we, down here, even though we were opposed to it, I'm among the most conservative members. Senator Boxer's a very proud liberal, and she and I together tried to have an amendment to take some of the money, the $800 billion, and put a large amount into infrastructure. Right now, we have to have roads and highways and bridges. That's what we're supposed to be doing up here. And of course, they didn't do it. Only 3% of the $800 billion went for that type of infrastructure. Over a trillion of this amount, once you add the cost, that's how we get up to $1 trillion, the cost of interest that we have to pay for the extra spending. So that's a total now of $2.5 trillion. So you've got your stimulus, $1 trillion, your Obamacare, $1.5 trillion. Then there's the president's relentless pursuit of legislation for regulation. And what we can't get through legislation, he does through regulations. Whatever the president hasn't been able to legislatively accomplish, he is attempting to do it through regulation, most of it through the Environmental Protection Agency. Cap and trade is a good example. You know, we debated that since the Kyoto Treaty was up, and clearly the votes aren't there. Right now, in this chamber, you wouldn't get 25 votes for a cap and trade. And yet everyone's talking about how that's important, we're going to have a cap and trade. So now he's trying to do it through regulations. Now that alone would cost the American people $300 to $400 trillion a year, not just one shot. That's a year. He has his Boehner legislation. That's maximum attainable emissions and maximum obtainable control technology. In other words, what can we do? What do we have the technology to do to stop emissions? Well, we don't have it, but he has that, and of course that is billions of dollars a year. Ozone regulations, I understand he was going to announce this week a tightening of the ozone regulations that would put 608 of our counties in America out of attainment. Now, I'm from the state of Oklahoma. It put 15 of our counties out of attainment. That means in those counties, they can't recruit industry, they can't hire people. Many of them will have to go out of business because of these ozone regulations. And it's not even, in my opinion, legal the way that he's doing it, because he's supposed to be addressing it every 5 years. And when he did it, when it was done in 2008, it was done on new technology. That's a requirement. And yet today, he's trying to do it using the same old 2008 technology. Again, extremely expensive. It's cast a tremendous cloud over the uncertainty in the business sector, and that's a key reason why it has announced today that the economy is only growing at a rate of 1.3% a year. That's terrible, especially when you consider the recession that we're in. Generally, as a general rule, economies recover rapidly when coming off of a financial recession. It's not unusual for countries to grow at 4, 5, and 6% for the years following a recession, but we can't even get around 2%. This has a huge negative effect on the economy and on the government. The president's regulatory agenda is the reason for our unemployment rate above 9%, and it's the reason that our economy is growing so slowly. And because of this, our tax receipts are way off their historic levels. Now, if we can get the economy to grow faster, to sustain in a sustained period of time, the effect on tax revenues is really unbelievable. I used to say, and it's pretty well accepted, that for a 1% increase in the economy, it equals about $50 billion in new revenue. And that's the way to grow revenue. Certainly, President Kennedy knew it, President Reagan knew it. And so the best way to increase revenue is to get the economy moving again, and of course increase the economy. If the economy grows at a rate of 1% faster than presently forecast for the next decade, then federal tax revenues would grow by nearly $3 trillion. And I conservatively estimate that the cost of federal revenues of the president's regulatory agenda has been $1 trillion. So we have there, through his regulatory behavior, another $1 trillion. That brings our total to $3.5 trillion. Then there's an increased non-security discretionary spending, which added up to $500 billion in spending. So we have now the cost of $500 billion, and there's expanded and increased spending on unemployment benefits, which are also a consequence of his regulatory policies that have killed the economy and its recovery, and the cost of that is another $500 billion. So together, all these failed policies add up to $4.5 trillion contribution to the federal deficits. Since Inauguration Day, the debt has increased by $3.7 trillion. It's on pace to increase by more than $5 trillion by the end of the president's first term. If we undid all of these failed policies, we wouldn't find ourselves in the situation we're in today. We wouldn't be here today debating this because it wouldn't be necessary. It's because of the president that we're even talking about raising the debt ceiling today. If we could undo the president's policies, we wouldn't need to raise the debt ceiling at all. And where's the president? He's been totally absent from this entire debt conversation. Today he's meeting with terrorists from Cote d'Ivoire, and he's probably going to go and play golf in the afternoon. I don't know. But he's not around here. He's not participating in this. He doesn't seem to care about debating the debt ceiling. He just wants to raise the deficits. And if he did care, he'd see the need for the Boehner plan, endorse it, and sign it into law. But I guess that's too much to ask. Well, we're going to have a chance to do this tonight. We're going to have a vote over in the House on the Boehner plan, I think around 6 o'clock, and then it's going to come over here. We'll have an opportunity to do that. And if the Democrats will support just a handful of them, we will be able to get that passed. So we'll wait till tonight and see what happens.